Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start chatting. Welcome, thank you guys for coming. An hour is a fairly short amount of time to cover a whole lot of things. I did some pondering about what would be most helpful to performers of Shakespeare. I find that as a director of Shakespeare and as an actor of Shakespeare, so many actors come to the work with the same approach that they would give to contemporary drama, contemporary comedy. And there's some value in that. Obviously, we use a lot of the same tools of sensory or emotional recall, action playing works quite well, objectives, obstacles, they work pretty well. But all of those 20th and 19th and 20th century acting things, everything that came off the tree of Stanislavski, of course, didn't exist for Shakespeare. They looked at things completely different in terms of what the actor's job was and how these plays were written for the actor. My speech later on this evening is going to center on a gentleman named John Barton, and pretty cool guy if you're unfamiliar with him. And I learned a lot and have learned a lot over the years of different things that John has said that have had impact on the way I approach Shakespeare. One of the things he said to me, he said, you do realize that the notion of character didn't exist for Elizabethan actors. The word character meant a letter in the alphabet. It was not a personality trait. So if you spoke about character to an Elizabethan actor, they would know what you were talking about. That was kind of interesting to me. The Elizabethan society was a listening society. Many did not read. We didn't have the accoutrement of lighting and electricity so that we could see actors well on stage. So it was all about listening. And because of that, I think, it was about wordplay. There was a sense of artistry with how well you could craft a line, a word, a phrase. When I'm working with college students who have not had much in the way of education in this realm, and what they've had has probably been boring and uninteresting and frightful, akin to, trigonometry, for those of you who don't like math like myself. You say Shakespeare and they just want to run screaming into the night. For me to try to make an association with what wordplay would be like today, I suggest, well, when you're texting someone and you come up with, and of course people aren't doing it as much these days because we've been texting for a while now, but early on, when you could come up with an interesting way of using words or letters or symbols or abbreviations to say something clever in a text, that was the feeling. It's like I created something that no one else is doing, and I did it with language. Kind of a neat thing. So when I work with a group of actors on Shakespeare, over the years, I've come up with a short list of to-dos, a to-do list, okay? And what I've prepared for you today, and it's like I said, what I give to my students, is 8 bullet points of things that an actor should do when approaching some heightened language, which is the kind of the catch-all phrase for Shakespearean text or Elizabethan text, heightened language. It doesn't work so well for contemporary drama. So the first thing, the first task I ask the actor to do is to read it aloud. So often we go to reading it to ourselves because we've been taught that way, we learned it early on. The irony is that when we first learned to read, we were asked to read aloud. That was a way of teacher knowing that we could in fact read. But as soon as we grasped the ability to read, then it was, all right, now read it to yourself, silent reading. Doesn't help you. We need to read the language aloud. 2 or 3 times, if you've got a short segment, I've given a bunch of them here on subsequent pages, you're going to read it out loud, and you're going to observe punctuation. Now, there's a lot of things that I've done over the year, but the most helpful for me is searching out what I'll call hard punctuation. Periods, exclamation points, question marks, colons. Go ahead and put a slash, 2 slashes, I usually use 2 slashes, that surround the hard punctuation. That's my stop. That is my place to breathe. I can take as much time as I want before or after the period, okay? There's this notion called end stopping that a lot of non-Shakespeare types get into when they read Shakespeare. They think they come to the end of the line and they're supposed to stop. No, you go to the punctuation. There is a thing, shall I say it that way, a thing among Shakespeare acting scholars that suggest that there is a slight pause at the end of the line. Some teachers teach it that way. I'm not going to disparage. I find it not helpful. I find that it's all well and good to understand that Shakespeare wrote in 10 or 12 or 13 or an 11-syllable line, and that there was some craft in his mind about what happens at the end of that line. But for an actor to stop or even think about stopping if there's no punctuation is folly, and it leads to confusion, so I don't encourage it. Punctuation is something that, and I think that this is important to know if you're playing a Shakespearean role. Know that whatever addition you're using, chances are it's going to have vastly different punctuation. I find that the Arden editions of Shakespeare are the gold standard. Some people use Riverside, some people swear by Folger. I think the most important thing for you, the actor, is to make sure that everyone's on the same page with the same punctuation. If you do come across an oddity that you need clarification, well, shoot, have a conversation with the director. I find that so much of the work that we do in Shakespeare is fluid, and the rules are always changing just a little bit. So don't get too hung up with, because I used to be, like, you have to use the Arden edition. No, you really don't, but it's good to check. Sometimes different punctuation gives you different possibilities. What's best about the Arden edition is the massive amount of footnotes at the bottom that work from a historical sense, from a grammatical sense, for clarity. Not everyone can afford the Oxford English Dictionary, and so many of the vocabulary, the hard vocabulary, the words that Shakespeare made up, or he just had such a massive vocabulary, and typically they'll note OED references in the Arden edition, which is great. And then the last thing that I love so much is the appendices. Oftentimes we'll have material that the play was based on. So for instance, in the Romeo and Juliet, there'll be an exact copy of one of the preceding scripts that Shakespeare used to kind of write Romeo and Juliet from, or Measure for Measure, which is a favorite play of mine. It's a it's a dark play, and the original material is even darker, so it's kind of cool. So Arden editions are awfully good. Okay, so you've read it aloud, and then you're going to look up unfamiliar words. Well, shoot, any actor worth his salt should do that. I find myself constantly saying, yeah, I know what that word means. Do I? Do I really? What's your definition of it, Jack? Write it down, and let's look it up and see if it's the same thing, because it may not be. So look up unfamiliar words. Cell phones have been a huge help to us because we can quickly do that, and oftentimes you're going to get most definitions of it. Yeah, sure, there are some Elizabethan takes on words that things mean differently back then than they do today, but there aren't too many of those, and most of them are noted in a dictionary. But go ahead and look them up, and I put all my information in the margins of the script. If you're OCD or anal compulsive or any of those things, and everything has to be nice and neat, fine. I had a good friend of mine, terrific actress, Linda Emond, and she color-coded everything. It was always kind of cool to look at her script. I am not that way. I have writing everywhere, all through I have drawings, I have Miami Dolphins pass patterns, I have all kinds of stuff. But go ahead and look up unfamiliar words. Number 3, paraphrase each line. I think that sometimes actors let themselves off the hook with this, and I think you have to be a little bit more specific in your paraphrasing. It's not a kind of, sort of kind of thing. You want to find a paraphrase that's meaningful to you, but speaks to what Shakespeare's talking about with regards to the images that he's using, a continuation of, or a progression of idea that he's building upon. That has to be in your paraphrase. Roy, one of my undergraduate teachers, used to say all the time, if you don't get it, they don't get it. If you don't get it, they don't get it. And so I'm pretty meticulous in my paraphrase. It also helps with learning lines. And depending on the play that you're doing, there are some plays that are just frankly much more difficult. Have you read Coriolanus? It's really hard. It's a hard piece to follow. There's a lot of arguments going on, and there's a lot of passion, and it's hard to follow. Midsummer Night's Dream, easy as pie. He got better as he went along. One could spend this entire hour, nay, we could spend a week working scansion. I learn a little bit more every time I do it, and I've been doing it a long time, and I still make a ton of mistakes. So, scansion is not a big scary thing. It's something to help you. And just like everything else, it should be fluid. There are times when I think a line is 13 syllables long. I've tried it every which way, and then, another time, another place, I'll look at that line and I'll go, oh my God, I'm supposed to elide this, or there's a V in it and I can elide it, and I didn't know that. And there are all of these rules, and I do have, if you're interested in scansion, I do have some information that I can mail to you that I've tried to boil down the main concepts. But in a nutshell, it's this. It should be 10 syllables in a line. That's what he's striving for. But because he was kind of a jazz player, he likes to break the rules a lot, And so sometimes he'll go 9 lines, or sometimes he'll go 12 or 13 lines. Then you've got to go through a series of exercises to see if you can figure out if it's any way possible to get this line back to 10. And at a certain point you go, no, it's 9. Then you got to figure out why he did it. Oftentimes, I find that when it's a short line, there's an activity or an action or something he's telling the actor or the director. They didn't really have directors back then, but he was letting his company know that something is going on in the scene. Something is taking the attention away from the person that is speaking, or there's a discovery. And so that uses up the rest of the short line. Sometimes they're shared lines. So then you gotta go either forward or backwards to see if you're sharing that line with someone else. There's a bunch of different, there's spondaic and anapestic. There are all these different kinds of configurations of stress. But I find that if you have a solid understanding of iambic, which is unstressed followed by stress, or trochaic, stress followed by unstressed, then you're good to go. You're good to go for most stuff. But don't not scan your text. Number 5, look for operative words. So what are operative words? They're the words that carry the meaning in the piece. Oftentimes we think that they're nouns, they're not. A lot of times it's the action that's getting the movement of the piece, the operative words. Not always, but sometimes. I find that in a 10-syllable line, you're going to have 2 or 3 operative words. Oftentimes 3. Number 6. Antithesis took me a long time to kind of get a sense of what it is, and it really speaks to rhetorical language and that sense of wordplay that I've talked about. And John Barton talked about setting word against word or phrase against phrase, because I asked him, I'm giving away part of my speech here, but I did have a conversation with him face to face, and it was one of the first things I asked him. I said, okay, antithesis. I think I understand it, but I need clarity. And he said, it's just setting word against word, phrase against phrase. I said, so it's comparing? He said, sometimes. He said, but sometimes antithesis starts on one line and he doesn't get back to it for another 6 lines or 7 lines. And if you can't make that connection, the audience misses the argument. And so whether it's to be or not to be, that is the question, or whether it's something much more confusing, antithesis plays a huge part in the work that we do. Finding a way to lift a word or lift a phrase so that it harkens back to something that happens before is the goal. So, antithesis. Image bodies. This was a concept that I got in undergraduate school. Frankly, I've not heard anyone else talk about them in this way since, not giving them the name image bodies, but it was the one that I learned from, so it sticks with me. But basically, Shakespeare has these almost word clouds throughout his plays of different things. So for instance, anatomy, mythology, nautical, animal, world-related, heavenly bodies, the great chain of being. These were all image bodies, and he uses these, like, as I say, word clouds throughout his plays, and the actor needs to pay attention to them. Yes, they're decorative. Yes, it's poetic. But it also helps you to kind of travel with your character, to chart the things that they're interested in. Truth be told, he bounces around quite a bit. I'm thinking specifically in mythology. You'll find in one play he'll be referring to Hermes 1 minute and Mercury the next. And it's like, could you pick which one you want to do? But I don't think it mattered to him all that much. I think Hermes and Mercury were essentially the same god, and Mercury had more syllables, so maybe he used that in the line. It may have just been as practical as that. The last thing I asked to look for is an idea that Louis Fantasia talks about. Louis Fantasia was the first contemporary artistic director, and I guess that kind of is a misnomer because back in the Elizabethan day when the Globe Theatre first began, there were no artistic directors. But Louis Fantasia was the first artistic director of the New Globe, and he has a number of different things that he worked with his actors on, and this one phrase has really stuck with me, and I pay attention to it a lot. And he says, make the nouns sound like what they are. And when I first read it, I was like, what do you mean? And then he uses the example. I know I'm in a theater, so forgive me, I'll go out and spit and turn around. But he uses the line, is this a dagger which I see before me? Is this a dagger? And he says, why does he say dagger instead of knife? Why does he say dagger instead of dirk? And he addresses the fact that it has more syllables, but he says, it's something else. A dagger is much more deadly. It sounds more deadly. Make it sound like what it is, okay? Use your language. Find variety in your language to create pictures. And I find that making the nouns sound like what they are is a helpful thought. So, what I'd like you to do, there are 10 speeches in the handout. 4 of the speeches are kind of connected. So I've taken the Othello speech and I've split that in 2 sections. And then I also split up the Hotspur speech on the 3rd page. But it doesn't matter. They're all of about 6 or 8 lines apiece. And what I'd like for you to do is to go ahead and read through it out loud, okay, a couple of times. If your scansion skills are up to it, by all means, go ahead and scan it. If they're not, don't worry about it. But I would like you to look for some operative words, okay? If there are image bodies worth noting, words that you don't understand, go ahead and make notes of those. And see if you can find anything that strikes you as antithetical, okay? I'll give you about 10 minutes. Just go ahead and kind of spend a little time on that, and then we're going to talk about something. All right, cool. Joanna, which one did you pick?
Bottom one on the first page.
It is the cause? Fabulous. Love it. Nora, which one?
I did the first one on the 3rd page. I think it's Richard.
Okay.
Well, I like that.
That's a good one.
You did that one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
The second one, Joanna said.
Which one did you do?
The Othello on the first page.
Oh, you did Othello on the first
Yeah,
page?
she did.
Oh, yes, she did, yeah. Which one did you do?
I did the third one on the 3rd page.
Okay, I have been studying?
Yes.
Oh, second, that's awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
A lot of Richard II.
Yeah, it was, yes.
It's what?
A lot of Richard II's getting picked here.
I love Richard the Two. Mr. Bagley, which one did you pick?
See, now I kind of want to do it.
Very first one?
Joanna, really
I
good
don't know
voice.
who says this, though. in Richard.
When I would pray and think? Okay.
Richard?
I think it's Richard. Is it the Richard or the one Todd and I did?
I mean, this one's from Richard. I don't think this. Oh, it's Richard speaking. Which one did you do?
Okay. So let's, what I'd like to do is just kind of have you share with me some things that you've noticed, things that maybe you hadn't noticed before, something that surprised you, something that you're having trouble figuring out. I thought if we would kind of throw some of these out with everyone, then we'd all get to play, and then I'd have you read your speech. So what'd you discover in the short period of time that you have? Anything interesting?
These were a lot more regular than I expected.
It was regular,
I,
okay.
I expected there to be more that didn't scan, but the couple that I looked at were pretty clean.
Okay.
Yeah, mine, I mean, for my money, there's some of the best speeches that Shakespeare ever wrote in Richard II.
Yes.
And,
Agreed.
this speech was really regular. I had to elide two things, I think. One was hammer it out, and the other was studying in the very first line. But I have been studying how I may compare.
Oh,
But I could either elide do it, and I cannot do it, yet I'll hammer it out. I cannot do it, yet I'll hammer it out. So either one of those, either way, makes it regular, but it's probably do it, I imagine. I cannot do it, yet I'll hammer it out. And do it, yet I'll hammer it out.
So, well, here's a couple of things on that. I cannot do it, caesura. So again, you want to check your addition, but if it's a semicolon, if it's a colon, if it's a period, and you've got a caesura, a full stop in the middle of that line, then you're going to start with you're going to start with an unstressed, or no, you're going to start with a stress, yet I'll hammer it out. And I think that would give credence to eliding, hammering it, and keeping I cannot do it. And I'm wondering too, just playing it, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. I don't know, it feels kind of abrupt to me there. It feels stronger, and I'll hammer it out. Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, my first choice was hammer, and I had it circled, and until I read it again just now, saying that I said maybe it is do it, because it happens a lot.
Yep, it does. It does.
And taking a noun and eliding it to an it is a weird, well, it's a verb because he's hammering it. So
As a side note with this speech, what I love about this speech is, to me, it's some insight into how Shakespeare approached his own work. So he has this query, Richard has this query, trying to figure out how he got to where he's at. He was king of the world, and now he's in a prison cell, and he's trying to figure it out. And I think that that's what Shakespeare does a lot of the time, and what actors have to do with his work is you gotta figure out what makes this clock tick. And so I love that speech for that reason. Good, what else we got?
But same sort of thing at the one on the top of that page.
Shall it for shame be spoken in these days? That's Hotspur from Henry IV, Part 1.
Hotspur. And the third line,
That men of your nobility and power.
power.
Are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
what is the,
Yeah.
what is the verb that you're calling that when you're taking out one of the, what are you calling
An
it?
elision.
Elision.
Yeah.
Can you spell that for me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now we call them contractions, right? But in scansion we refer to it as an elision, where you're smooshing the words together. And sometimes we're extending the words. So banished, we're
Right.
adding a syllable.
So it's called elision.
What's that?
That's what it's called, elision.
Elision, yes. Elision. Elision, yes.
But that one had a antithesis in the very first two lines. The now or later.
Yes, now or later. Absolutely terrific. Good.
Oh.
Also, you can't help but notice, and I notice the alliterations, he uses it a lot. Shall it for shame be spoken in these days? So there's that beats going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes he'll play the Fs. Sometimes he'll play the Vs. It's usually when the character's worked up that he'll play those alliterate. And certainly Hotspur is a choleric character. He's constantly running on and hollering and shaking his fist. And it was what's that?
But it's in his name.
Oh, it is. It is. So it's really hard to. I've not seen it on any Amazon or anything, but there's a video of Olivier playing Hotspur, and he played him with a stutter. And it was really cool because the more he got worked up, it was really neat. And so when he died, I forget his final line of it, "You've made worms meat of me." I think no, that's Romeo and Juliet. And food for worms is the last line, and he continued the stutter on the W, and food for and then he said worms, brave Percy. It's a really cool choice, really smart. Yeah, Olivier, damn him. Mike, what'd you find?
Hey, Mike.
You, Mike. We already talked to that,
I
Mike.
found some elision anchors on Isabel.
Yes.
Heaven in my mouth, I think. The repetition of that pattern, I think, works through that whole line.
I'm trying to find it. Hold on.
It's the very first monologue.
It's the very first monologue.
My
When I would
invention-
pray and think, I think and pray. Yes, yes,
my
yes, yes.
invention, hearing not my tongue, anchors on Isabel, heaven in my mouth.
So the V's, anytime you've got a V, you know that there's an elision there. And
Yeah.
it's really hard directorially. I'm constantly saying to my students, I'm going, yeah, just say the V. Don't elide it, because when you say hand in my mouth as if I did not only chew his name, the audience goes, there's a chicken in his mouth? Right? Hand in his mouth?
You gotta do a weird global stuff
Yes.
to make it understandable.
Yeah. This is such a great speech. So in this speech, Angelo is praying. He's think of Claudius when he's, saying, "Oh, my offense is rank." This is Angelo's, and what has happened is, if you're not familiar with the play, Isabel is a novice, and she has come to Angelo, who is the acting duke, and she's asking to save her brother's life, who has been charged with the crime of adultery or fornication, and he's going to be put to death. And as I said, she's a novice, she's a nun, and Angelo, great name because he presents himself as an angel. He presents himself as spotless pure. He sees her and goes, "Oh my God." And he's like, "I want her." And when she leaves, he's like, "I don't know what to do." And so when we see Angelo, just before Isabel comes back to find out whether her brother lives or not, he is at prayer. And this is what he's saying. Pray and think. Think and pray on several subjects. Great
And they're not the
alliteration.
same.
I mean, great antithesis there, right? Several subjects. Heaven in my mouth as if I did but only chew his name, which is so Catholic too. Any
Right.
Catholics in the house? So when you receive the host, right? Back in the golden age, you couldn't touch the host. It was placed on your tongue. I remember getting in trouble for chewing the host, as if I did but only chew his name, and in my heart the strong and swelling evil of my conception. So this whole imagery of erection and fornication is there. It's very dark. It's such a cool speech.
And there's an elision over 2 lines, I think, at the end.
At the
Strong
end.
and swelling evil of my conception.
Conception, yes.
Yeah, like the evil to of.
Yeah. Excellent. Oh, love that speech. Good deal.
Your mic fell off. Sorry.
It's falling off.
We'll get you a safety pin.
It's all right. Okay, back at it. What do we, you had,
Same one, Mike.
same one that Mike did. the Richard II. Did you find anything?
Well, for me, goes back, very simple. When I was reading the same line we're talking about, hammer it out, illusion, I thought, well, he could have said, I can't do it. And then I read it out loud, and it wouldn't work.
Right.
I cannot do it. And that was, for me, that was struck me, that it had to be said and put that way.
It's so important that you got to speak this stuff out loud, because oftentimes if you make the text work a solitary kind of to yourself exercise, you're going to find out that your tongue's going to tell you what's right anyway. He was really good at putting words in actors' mouths. He's not going to trip you up. But by the same token, you gotta put the work in if you're going to completely understand it. Now, here's something to consider. I was thinking about this the other day. So we do all this work. I mean, if you take a look at the Brutus handout that I gave you, what I try to do with this example is to share, mostly with my student actors, all of the things to be considered. And so, there are notes on for instance, Brutus begins with, it must be by his death. He begins with the answer to the speech. He knows where he's going with this, but he wants to hammer it out. He wants to work through his decision-making process. It's classic oratory debate, classic rhetoric. Monosyllabic, that first line, every word is a single syllable word. And typically what that means is that it's emphatic. It must be by his death. It must be by his death. I mean, there's so many opportunities there, and each of those words can land on their own. You can make something of them. And for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn at him. Okay, there's a homonym here. I know no personal cause. So my point is, you see all of this. An actor can't play all of this. There comes a certain point where you have to go, okay, now I'm going to play it, right? Because you have to hope that you've done the work and it will find its way through your performance. You can't, you ever watch, a concert pianist play Rachmaninoff, and it's just like this. They can't stop to think about what they're doing. You have to channel it. You have to let it go. And I think that that's a lesson for us as well. That yes, do all of this work, but then at a certain point, get rid of it. And speak the speech, I pray you, trippingly on the tongue. Right? Which is...
Trip over your tongue.
What's that?
And then trip over your tongue.
Yes. Suit the action to the word to the action. That is another magnificent piece. Nora,
Yes.
anything for you?
Yeah, I found two different antitheses. The top of three antitheses.
Got it. Shall it for shame be spoken in these days?
Spoken in these days, chronicled in times to come, or in time to come. And then lovely rose and thorn at the end.
Yeah. So
Richard's the rose and lovely rose.
right. So we're also commenting on the White Rose and the War of the Roses, which are to come. There's that, and then and to plant this thorn, this canker, Bolingbroke. So there's this lovely sense of, and to put down Richard, that sweet, lovely rose. It's this kind of, there's the image body there, right? and it's something beautiful and wonderful. And then he's using antithesis of planting a thorn, a canker, something dark, something horrible, something that will not grow.
Canker is one of those nouns that you can
Yes, yes,
say, like,
exactly
it
right.
sounds, yeah.
All of those, I think.
Well,
Yes.
He doubles down on the negative, though. The
Thorn.
sweet, lovely rose. It's a thorn,
Thorn,
and a canker,
and a bollworm.
and both, like,
Well, and you know, Fantasia says this, he calls it the Shakespeare paradigm. He says that why do I say what I say in the order in which I say it?
Yeah.
And he uses, again, I'm quoting in the theater, but he uses how foul and fair a day I have not seen. Why not how fair and foul? No, because it speaks to Macbeth's dark nature. It speaks to his cup half empty, right? And then here's exactly, this is the order in which I say it. And I think he saves canker. He says thorn first and then canker, because then you get that K that kind of adds that click to it, right? That makes it even darker. This thorn, this canker, Bolingbroke, and again another K. So great. You know, Patrick Stewart said this of John Barton. He said, you know, when you work with John Barton, you realize that every single word is important. There is not a wasted word. And that every time you think, you realize, no, he didn't just. He actually knew what he was doing all the time. So frustrating. So amazing. So amazing.
That's why he gets a festival.
Yeah. So when I was in London for the first time, and we went to see Shakespeare's grave, and it's in the church, and there's a stone piece over his grave, and it's next to his wife, and there's a vase of some roses there. And so Penny and I got there early in the morning, and we were like the first people in, and so we got a chance to go up and look and so forth. And you know, she was like, when are we going to lunch? And I'm like, this is amazing. I'm having this out-of-body experience. And the doors at the back of the church opened, and a large entourage of Japanese tourists came in with the guy holding the book, and they're all talking amongst themselves, and they're not speaking, of course, any English at all. And they're very enthusiastic, and they want to, of course, come up to the altar and see Shakespeare's grave. And so we moved aside, and I'm looking at the church and this and that, and there's a group of about 20 of them, and they're all kind of talking, and the guide silences them, and he starts speaking in Japanese. And I know, because he keeps, he's pointing to it, and I know he's telling them about it. And he says, William Shakespeare. And the whole group went, ah. And I thought, everyone in the world knows who this guy is. Everyone in the world, no matter what your language is, he has had that kind of impact. So I thought that was cool. Anyway, thank you all. If I can get your email addresses, most of you I have, if you're interested in my packet on Scansion, and like I said, it's very user-friendly. I'm glad to send an electronic copy to you, and then when you're working with people, you've got something to work with. I labored on it for a while, picking and choosing the things that I thought helped most. But if you want to do that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
It's good stuff, sir.
Can I ask a tough question right now?
Yeah.
In that Richard II speech,
Yes.
he says, I've been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. He uses world like 4 times in this speech, but, and for because the world is most populous in here is not a creature but myself. I cannot do it, yet I'll hammer it out. My brain I'll prove the female to my soul the father. I wonder why he went female instead of mother. And like mother, father, female father, it's the same amount of syllables, so it's on purpose.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, I just wondered about that.
And I also find it a little bothersome. I'll prove the female to my soul the father, and these two beget a generation of still breeding thoughts. That's
My dad and any female are going to create all these things.
like
Or-
unnamed
like,
female.
It doesn't really matter who the woman is. Yeah.
Or is it that daughter? Or, no, because that,
and my first take feels very. He doesn't refer to Zeus or Jupiter in this, but it feels very mythological. It feels like, yeah, well, because of the reference of mind and so forth, yeah. So I don't know if that's it. It's a great point, Mike, and one of those things where you just go, keep asking questions. You're not going to find all the answers. I mean, he's not around for us to go, hey, what were you thinking here? But that's a really good point. I'll prove the female to my soul. Now, also interesting, Richard is oftentimes you see Richard played in a very, if we were to say phrase today, a very gender neutral sense. He's not the most masculine of guys.
He was not the warmonger, like.
No, he's not Bolingbroke. I mean, Bolingbroke is like the guy's guy, right? He's going to fight in a duel, and Richard is, all about poetry and yeah, he's the Rose. And I think he's saying something positive about female too. This is the thing about it. You guys found it out with Taming of the Shrew. For an age that was so horrible to women, in terms of misogyny and the way that the world was set up and all of that good stuff, Shakespeare wrote some badass women, and they were always smarter than the men. Always.
It is true.
Yeah, without a doubt at all.
Yeah, I mean, Romeo's worthless. Juliet's the one. I mean,
He just comes in, falls in love, and that's it.
Yeah. But it's true of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, or Lady Mac until she loses her brain, her mind.
You made a good point under her breath here. I don't know, but it struck me too. The line is, "My brain I'll prove the female to my soul the father." So he's saying his brain is the female, and that his soul is the father.
The father.
And he's talking about begetting thoughts, right? To populate.
Right, so
the earth.
a generation of still breeding thoughts.
Thoughts.
And these same thoughts people this little world, and that little world is
Prison cell.
The prison cell.
Yeah, of why the world that he is currently in. Right.
Yeah, he's trying to compare his
So it's like the.
solitude.
He's saying ultimately it's a bunch of words to say, I don't know why I'm here, I can't figure it out yet, but I'm gonna figure it out, and this is how I'm gonna figure it out.
And he says, in humors like the people of this world, for no thought is contented. He's making these little people in his little world, and none of them are happy.
No, they're miserable.
Like, he's making a point that
Yes.
none of them are happy.
Well, and at that time, what would be the distinction of soul? Like, would soul be, like, we've got all these modern interpretations of what soul is. Soul is emotional or whatever, or even gets translated into being your spirit being, or.
Well, I think for Richard and I think for Shakespeare, the soul is going to be tied up with the religious nature. This is a Catholic play. I mean, that's a real interesting, if you get a chance to read is it 1601, 1600? I can't remember the exact title, but basically it talks about the year that Shakespeare wrote Hamlet and a number of other big plays. But specifically, they're talking about the transition from Catholicism to Protestantism and what was going on in London at that time. And so this dangerous game that he played, because it was dangerous. If you were Catholic during the time when Protestants were running England, and you had iconography in your house, if you had rosary beads, you'd be killed. You know, there was no accepting of that at that time. And we go back, and during Shakespeare's life, we go from Catholicism to Protestantism, back to Catholicism. I mean, it changes like crazy. So Hamlet, for instance, you know, confession plays a big part of that, you know, being in purgatory. These are Catholic notions. But yet in other plays, it's much more Protestant. It feels much more Protestant. So I would say that anything talking about the soul is going to have religious implications. I don't think we're talking about some metaphysics. Yes, right, exactly.
And he talks about the humors, which he talks about in a million different
Yes.
ways. Because they were obsessed with that idea of the four humors. And none of them are positive.
Nope.
Humors are always bad, one way or the other.
Gall, bile,
Yeah.
blood,
Yeah.
yes, all of that.
Blood,
Yep.
yellow bile, black
Yellow,
bile,
yeah,
phlegm. Like,
The gender's call.
I have a weird question, because when I'm thinking of people in Elizabethan England would have understood this, and we had so much trouble. They didn't walk around speaking iambic pentameter.
No, they didn't.
So why, I'm trying to think how to phrase this, other than why he wrote this way.
Well, you know, it's not an odd question. It's a question that keeps being asked. And the sense that I get is that was what the aesthetic was. That was the aesthetic of the day. Like rap music is, or, you know, whatever. I mean, it was just the thing that worked. Now, I will say that if you read some of the other playwrights of that time, Kit Marlowe, for instance, they're just not as good. I'm sorry, they're just not as good. We saw the Jew of Malta when we were in London, and I'm telling, I wanted to like it because the acting was great, but damn, I was like bored out of my mind. Even the revenge tragedies, the
Titus type stuff.
yeah, it just doesn't read as well. It just, you know, it just doesn't read as well. So I you know, I guess that's what they wanted to hear. That's what the audience wanted to hear, and obviously it worked because we're still watching it. So, anywho.
Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun.